So we've talked about kind of the power of the cloud as it's been talked about with things like Crackdown 3. Remember how we saw that really cool showcase where all of these parts were really coming apart as the building was falling over and the player was kind of running underneath of it. And then they showed us a whole showcase where the building like exploded and it made like a really powerful, like an i7 for example, kind of chug. But then when they added the cloud service, it started to work fine. And that was really cool. I wanted to see a little more from it as we went on, and while we haven't seen that much more from it, in fact, I think that might be one of the reasons Crackdown 3 has been delayed, is because they're still working to integrate this entire like cloud-based service into it. It was really interesting to me, and I wanted to see some more from it, really different instances of it working in games. But as far as we could tell, it was pretty much locked in to Microsoft and Crackdown 3 for the time being, and that was fine since it was still being developed. It wasn't really ready for prime time yet. Well, it looks like Cloudgine, which is the name of the company who developed the technology that was running on Microsoft's Azure server farm, looks like it's going to be going to all platforms. In their words, it's going to be platform agnostic, and they purposely named some different platforms like the PlayStation 4 and even the Nintendo Switch. Now, according to them, the technology has been worked on for about the past 3 or 4 years, according to them, and right now it's ready to go to the point where they're developing their own virtual reality game, which looks interesting. It's called They Came From Space, and it's going to be running in VR, so it's going to be more of a VR-based game, and as you know, VR games have to run at a high frame rate, and you'll see that it's doing a lot of really big destructible environment type things, like you see pieces flying all over the place, which would generally tax the CPU to the point where it's going to really start to chug. But they're using cloud-based computing here, so a lot of what you're seeing there with physics, where all the pieces are flying apart and scattering everywhere, again, something that would really tax the CPU. If it was pretty strong, it would still have a hard time keeping up because, well, there's only a limited number of threads that CPU can use. But in this case, because of something like a massive cloud-based server farm that they can use and kind of tap into that power, everything remains fine. In fact, they said the game, despite really having all of those physics-based events going on, runs at 90 frames per second, which is great for VR since, well, if you're using VR, you need high frame rates. Now, what's really interesting here that I think a lot of people have to take note of right now is that a lot of the compute aspects that are used for physics, for example, can also be applied to other parts of the game. And what I think is extremely interesting here, aside from like destructible environments running well and looking very, well, crazy when stuff's blowing up, I think it'd be very interesting to see what they have talked about, which is the next progression, something like complex AI, for example, or pathfinding for NPCs. So take, for example, a big world in, let's say, Grand Theft Auto, right? Where there are really NPCs everywhere. Could you imagine if like a good chunk of them, or even all of them, had really cloud-based services that are pretty much computing where they're going to be going at that time, for the day even, and everyone has like random aspects that are happening around that one NPC, whether it's what they're wearing or where they're going for the day or who they're meeting up with. It could turn a world into like a really living world at that point, right? It'd be much more detailed. The atmosphere, I think, would be much better. And you could also apply it, I think, personally, right away to like an MMO, something where people have to be online to even play the game. You could take something like, say, DC Universe, for example. I played that game for a little bit, but something that always stuck out to me was when I would walk around in the city, or even, I guess, fly around or run up buildings and stuff, there weren't a lot of NPCs at all, like walking around just for atmosphere, right? But if you had something like a cloud-based service that was doing a lot of the heavy lifting, you could have NPCs kind of walking around and doing some interesting stuff to make the world actually feel like a world. AI is, of course, very interesting as well, because then, of course, enemies in general could become pretty smart. Like, you could have online, I guess, bots and stuff that are actually clever and can learn from your actions, things like that. While that sounds kind of scary to some, obviously, because then they're learning, it would be really cool to do different things like that. Maybe bosses, again, in MMOs could have, like, really good AI, and it would be very interesting to see how they could work that out. At this point, from what they have said, they're not even sure all the stuff that this technology could do, and that's why they're trying right now to get it into as many hands as possible, now that it's pretty much ready to go out. It seems like they kind of used Crackdown 3 as like their beta phase, just to get everything working and make sure it worked with Azure, which is obviously a server farm that I think a lot of these companies would love to use for their testing phases and everything. Looks like that was the case, and now we're going to see this technology go out everywhere. I mean, there's just the imagination behind this. I'm sure there's several people out there that come up with some really cool things. Especially even you guys, like in the comments, why don't you let me know what you think this would do? How could this change gaming in your mind for different games? Me personally, as you've probably already guessed, I would love to see open worlds become more living and breathing, and I do think they could probably get there with this technology depending on, well, what you need. Now, they did say, based on how complex the computations are, you may need a faster internet connection. Crackdown 3, for example, needs a 2 megabit connection for the different computations to happen in the background. Now, according to them, if that kind of dips below that, it's not going to affect the gameplay. In their mind, though, some of the rendering may look a little funky at times when the kind of that lower bandwidth is taking place, and then if it jumps back up, it will fix that. From what I'm gathering, from what they've said, think of like, I guess, if you're watching a stream and all of a sudden the quality dips a little bit because, well, it lost some packets or the connection dropped a little bit. That's kind of how it would happen on their end, but they said the gameplay wouldn't be affected. They also talked about a very interesting aspect of GPU offloading to the cloud, which sounds weird, but consider something in their minds as like a weaker computer could now play a game that it wouldn't be able to before just by offloading some of the GPU tasks to the server farm, for example. A very large one, obviously, but consider that. That would be very interesting as well, because then you could get people into your game, especially if it's an online-only game, and maybe they do need help playing your game. Well, the servers can help them do that. I don't really know how that would work well, considering you probably need them to pay for that service, but that'd be interesting. I mean, especially if it's like a monthly fee type thing for an MMO, yeah, people will probably upgrade just to be able to play it on like a junky netbook or something. But yes, this is very exciting to see this finally kind of leave its, I would say its beta stages with Crackdown 3. That game, I think, is just about done. They were just doing, probably they had to push it back for some finishing touches with this service. But for the most part, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when other developers get into the action here and start really becoming very creative outside of destructible environments. Like I said, I want to see some crazy stuff happen. And what's really cool is there is full integration, according to them, with Unity and Unreal Engine. So let me know what you guys think about this service. Do you think this could really help innovate games going forward? I personally am pretty excited for it because I think going forward the internet will become more and more available worldwide, even though Comcast seems to be dragging their feet all the time, especially with upload. I don't want to get into that, but I do think eventually we'll get to a point, 10, 15, 20 years, where the internet will be pretty much readily available everywhere. And most games probably will take advantage of that and be maybe online-only games where you need a connection. And in some cases, maybe they can integrate like a basic physics engine. And then when you're online, maybe you're playing online like Deathmatch or something, the physics really get kicked up a notch and you're using the cloud for that. I don't know. Very interesting. Let me know what you guys think about any ideas, though. That's what I'm really curious about. What do you think the cloud could really accomplish here for different aspects of the game, whether it is AI, whether it is NPC behavior, pathfinding, or maybe it has something to do with the player? Let me know what you guys think. I'll see you next time.